everybody. Welcome to the 7th episode of the Armchair Philosophy Podcast. As always, it's Alessandro. Joining me today is
Marco
and
Russo.
Yes, we're three people. We're one short. Troilus isn't here today, unfortunately. So we're gonna have to pick up the pace without him, but we're gonna try to do that today. So, as you may have noticed, we dropped the theme part of the podcast in order to make sure that we've got a lot more flexibility in things that we talk about. Speaking of which, today I wanted to bring up an idea. Comes out of ethical studies, I suppose. Comes out of economic studies as well. An idea of poverty. I mean, not necessarily, poverty as a theme, poverty as a topic, but an idea that might work to alleviate poverty. Okay, and this is the idea here. If we were to focus on giving people autonomy, then we would be focusing on relieving poverty as a secondary function.
Secondary angle?
Yeah, exactly. Is it?
Right.
Let me explain it a little bit more than that. I mean, if we're saying so far that at least in terms of money that's given from foreign nations, money that's given from charities, doesn't matter exactly, but wherever the money goes to poor people in the world, it could be in your own country, could be in a country somewhere far away. The angle is to provide money to cure the cause of poverty, which is lack of money, lack of resources, right? But there's more to poverty than lack of resources. And obviously, because poverty still exists, and it still exists in a wide amount of areas, we know that the giving money angle doesn't work too effectively, obviously, or at least it's not working fast enough for our taste, considering the fact that there's still poverty out there. So then maybe there's a time now to change and switch focuses. Instead of saying, let's give as much money as possible in order to cure the symptom of poverty, why don't we instead focus on giving autonomy back to the people who are effectively in poverty? What do you guys think of that?
Right. Well, I mean, just simple wealth redistribution, welfare, that stuff. I mean, those are temporary fixes to help someone who's in trouble. Those aren't permanent changes in the foundation of the economy, which is what we need to solve poverty. I mean, I don't really have any, examples of policy ideas really off the top of my head, or really I can't further advance any policy ideas to really attack it right now. But I mean, there's some general ideas. Basically, we need growth overall. Theory is, I mean, if we grow fast enough, theoretically, poverty will end sometime. If everyone, I mean, if you're working a minimum wage job, that should end up being enough. If your buying power will increase when production increases, but that's just not really happening.
Right, but I mean that's the old trickle down format, right? Where as long as everybody grows, then everybody all the boats rise, right? That's sort of idea, but that's obviously not been the case. Right. I mean, ever, really.
Right. Well, because our economy is not really growing at all, and the population is increasing. We need a certain amount of growth just to keep up with population increase. Period. So right now, at the most, we're just been treading water, so to speak.
Okay, and so because of that, instead of focusing necessarily on redistribution or even a form of investment for growth, or investment in a certain type of place in the world, why not focus on, say, people, regardless of who they are, deserve autonomous lives in order to live out their hopes and their dreams above the line of poverty, right?
Right.
That then becomes a different equation, because then instead of putting money in to simply say, listen, this year's your next form of food, not only do you do that, but you also put in schools, you also put in social services with that same money. Part of that budget gets shifted to more of an intellectual growth than an economic growth. Does that make sense?
Education. I mean,
education.
You also have to realize
thing,
what are you going to do with your wealth and your resources? I mean, a lot of it's just not necessarily understanding what you need and what you don't need. So I mean, that's the education that we should be focusing on more so than just simple skills. Yeah. More like mindset, philosophy.
Philosophy taglines
in schools. K through 12.
Well, apart from philosophy is one thing, but you can even teach just general life skills.
Right.
That's one thing. But here's probably the bigger question, right? So, assuming that for some reason we agree that the growth of autonomous lives is what really is needed, is the moral obligation to provide somebody an autonomous life a bigger obligation than to just get somebody out of poverty?
Well, you think you need to, definition of poverty is the lack of being able to meet basic needs. Basic needs are water, food, shelter, and your health, really. So healthcare is a big part. I mean, there are a lot of people who don't have health insurance still in this country. I mean, the new Obamacare, or I forgot the technical name of it, but whatever it is, I mean, it's a step in the right direction, but it's not universal yet. So I think step one is universal healthcare of some sort.
So so there's still something to be said though for posing an obligation for a better autonomous life for everybody.
Right.
So reverse to the question: is that stronger than saying a moral obligation to give money to those who need it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that having an autonomous life will lead one to find those pursuits and those struggles and go within, move within a framework that will better themselves. However, there can be like that downside, and one of the things that you did touch upon was bringing in those social services, which will help augment creating and stimulating autonomous life with an individual, but still stepping out of poverty and kind of coming from it myself and knowing and understanding what it means. Like even moving out of it can be difficult because the society that you come from and the class or the level of people that are around you, to break that mold of like maybe stepping from the lower class to the lower middle class, even that can be a transition in which you sometimes have to leave behind a lot of the individuals and the people that you knew in order to make that mold, that switch.
But so then are you saying that people would remain in poverty? I mean, they would forgo an autonomous life for the sake of community? Is that the idea?
There is a possibility, and a lot of people do, because I mean, as much as we want to be individuals, we're also social creatures, and many of us, I think, put society sometimes and familial values above individual values. And it depends which culture you come from. If you're from a strictly American, like Germanistic or culture or Irish culture, where it's maybe like a little more rooted in the fact that it is you of yourself making that individual move, that could be easier. But for someone who comes from maybe like more contemporarily speaking Latino background, where a lot of some of your self-identity is rooted in the success of your family, of your friends, of your peer groups, then there is a struggle from within, to transcend.
Well, then maybe, I mean, this is going to sound weird because obviously these two ideas are almost opposites, right? What if we embodied a call for group autonomy? In the sense that, sure, so getting out of poverty is good. That's obviously a plus for anybody, I would suppose. Mm-hmm. But there's always that, like you just mentioned, there's always that question of what happens when you leave the community if you are the only one to leave the community, mm-hmm. Either you leave people behind or people think that you've left them behind one way or another. That's a problem. Do we then focus on providing group autonomy? Do we then say the only moral obligation is to be able to get a whole group out of poverty, considering that they are in poverty to begin with? Do we split up the poor then? Is that what we do? I mean, it sounds like a Charles Dickens novel. Do we split up the poor? But I mean,
on what lines? I mean,
that's sort of.
I mean, there's so many different affiliations. Like you can't. There's not. I mean,
yeah. I mean, that's the problem that I seem to be hitting with this definition, right? I mean, if we've agreed that autonomy is good, right? An autonomous life is good, but there's also the problem of what happens when you leave a group behind. So then, how do we merge these two ideas together? The obvious sort of the first one that hits you is group autonomy,
right?
Something that falls under the banner of group autonomy, right. where you allow a group under any circumstances or any individual any identification that they want to put themselves in, right? So racial or economic or I don't know what else there might be, I guess even gender, religious based, anything really. You take that group and then you supply some form of help in increasing a group autonomy, but then that just pushes the group forward. You might leave some behind that are part of the group, but still in poverty, right?
I mean, that's pretty subjective. It's much easier to just look at objectively. Look at poverty in just terms of social class and economic status, right? I mean, because if you start looking at, are you going to address different groups within who are under poverty. That just seems, I don't know, just rather confusing. I don't understand how you would go about that.
You're saying that that poverty is all encompassing.
Yeah, I mean, there are different members of every group who are in poverty who are the people going in and out of poverty, every other year. So I mean, it's like it's more of, it's not really an individual thing. It's more, incumbent on the whole society to really just focus on, because I could be in poverty next year. Like, who knows, right?
Right.
You don't know what's going to happen. So I mean, it's really a problem for everybody.
Right. I mean, I would like to think, I might be wrong, so, if anybody's out there on the internet wants to say their own opinion, which we've never seen before on the internet, I think this is more of an American thought, right? This whole poverty is all-encompassing through different class lines and through different group identities, right? Mostly race, let's be honest, with the history of this country. But maybe there's something to be said about international poverty, right? So, I mean, I would like to say that while obviously poverty within your own nation is as important as poverty anywhere else, it's still poverty. It's still the same problem. We probably might be better off avoiding that for now.
Yeah, I'd say it's almost easier to address poverty, say, in Africa. I mean, because it's kind of way more obvious. The conditions are way more obvious. I mean, right, like third world countries. I mean, because in America, it's a lot more complex. I mean, it's like I said, it's shifting in and out. There are a lot more social issues here.
Yeah.
In other countries, third world countries, it's just purely that the resources aren't there.
That's
and
right.
The foundations just are not there, and it's pretty much devouring the entire country, whatever they're in.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I would think it would be to the counter, and that the resources and the mineral wealth is there. It's been the extraction of it.
The exploitation, you mean, of the third world countries?
And the fact that the extraction doesn't really coincide with any infrastructure development. And social development, and in that case, like what you've seen in like the continent of Africa has been the work of like the people working hard to stimulate their economic growth, and then at the same time not really have any long-term investment or development to show for it. And so it's a day in toil and struggle, and at the same time nothing to grasp to look towards the future.
Right. I want to try to say, I guess it's more, because it's such a broad problem in a lot of third world countries. There's a lot of easy fixes that can get a lot of people out of poverty. I mean, to show you could build a well in a certain village, and all of a sudden, like 50% of people are out of poverty, just like that, right? In America, you can't. There isn't like that easy, like bang for buck fix that you can get a whole lot of people out of poverty. It's a much more complex, like, I don't know, institutional issue here. So I guess that's what I was trying to say.
But I mean,
that is very true, and I mean the poverty of America, really the only attainment out of it is sort of through the individual sense, the ego of one to be able to struggle out of it, and that really only happens like in education,
Right.
Here in American society.
A lot of people aren't living in poverty in the classical sense, economically, living in poverty in their mind, really. I mean, a lot of people are trapped in this survival like mindset, even if they're not needing to survive, right? So I mean, that's kind of.
Well, I mean, it's I would assume that if they're thinking survival, they're probably in a survival mindset. Period.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if I would like to go as far as you there in that one.
Right.
But I mean, I want to get back to this idea of exploitation, right? And I want to run something by you guys. There we go. That's what I wanted to say. There's this idea in Marxist and mostly neo-Marxist international relations where the worldwide economy is based around, obviously, a capitalist system. But within that capitalist system, the countries that are at play, the ones that have the higher GDP, have a higher GDP because they run like a corporation, in the sense that they go out, try to find low and sell high. Now, finding low, however, puts third world countries normally in sort of a bad place, simply because they're the ones getting the short end of the stick in terms of the outcome inequality, right? Because if a place like Sierra Leone, where the people who might have all the diamonds in the world to sell the diamonds and be rich themselves, have outside companies from much more wealthier nations come in, take the diamonds, leave, and then sell them for a massive profit, obviously, because diamonds are that sort of commodity. Now, I'm personally not akin to any Marxist scenario, simply because we know for a fact that Marxism, at least in the national side, does not work. Yeah. But I mean, this is sort of an interesting perspective from international relations point of view, because they aren't wrong. about it, right? Statistically speaking, or at least the facts that the neo-Marxist international relations theorists bring up aren't wrong. People do get at the short end of the stick, and on the country level and state level, internationally, they definitely do. What do you guys think about that one?
I mean, they exploit them, but I mean, what's the alternative?
That it does happen, or if you guys think it's not necessarily the case.
I'm in total agreement or concurrent with that. You know, I would have to say, like, for the mainstream of America, and we were talking about this earlier too. Most people love Bill Clinton, you know, and a lot of his policies. But as far as NAFTA goes, you know, as being from a Latino background, like you have to know that the North American Free Trade Agreement, I mean, it did more harm to the people and the citizens of Mexico, especially the poverty-stricken, like, farm workers, to the point where, I mean, it became cheaper for Americans in America to produce corn and then export it, the national staple of a people, export it to a third world country and put all these farmers out of business, who then consequently had to shift and cause some of the migrational ties that brought them into America, especially in the early 2000s. You know, so you can see the exploitation happening there, and it happens at a corporate level, and it hurt.
But here's a question: was NAFTA designed to do that sort of thing? Was NAFTA drawn up in order to say, you know what, we would like to export corn back to Mexico? I mean, it seems like a lot of international trade agreements have a lot of good heart in mind, in the sense, you know, in terms of open capitalist exempt and to have a market value for everything, and everybody has a fair say, at least theoretically.
Looking at short term, I mean, NAFTA was only implemented 20 years ago, maybe. I mean, so you got to look at things long term wise. I mean, globalization, certainly short term, there'll be a lot of pain with a lot of people. The market's gonna change, the economy's gonna have to change. I mean, in America, we're exploiting other countries somewhat, but I mean the industry. The car industry here, that sort of stuff. I mean, people are hurting here too. So I mean, it's just a change in the global economy.
Right, but I mean, there's a hurt between somebody who's unemployed. There's a difference between the hurt between somebody who's unemployed in Detroit and somebody who gets caught up in a Bangladeshi, you know, garment factory collapse.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's. I'm not saying that the United States is there, you know, loosening the bolts on the foundations of the building, but that's essentially what it comes down to. It comes down to shoddy workmanship within countries who really do work on the dime. Right.
And it'd be ideal if there were more safety concerns and more humanistic approach to globalization, of course, like no doubt about it. But if there were, then maybe they wouldn't have globalized in the first place and gone after and built those factories in the third world country. They did that because they could, somewhat exploit them in comparison to the workers here. So, short-term wise, it looks horrible, but, long-term wise, it does, could build growth. More interaction with Western ideas, more, you never know what that's going to bring. Look at the Asian tigers, right? That's the classic example in support of globalization. At first, it looked like a horrible idea, right? For those countries, they were...
Investors were not very keen on the whole idea.
And the people were, there was uprooting the whole culture and whatnot. That it's your classic example. And then all of a sudden, slowly but surely, a middle class was formed. They started, better access to education, and all of a sudden now they are where they are.
Yeah, but why aren't apart from obviously historical influences in different countries in East Asia, why aren't there more Asian tigers? That's the question, right?
Why aren't there African tigers?
No. Why is it just talking about Asia, just talking about East Asia, and why aren't there simply more Asian tigers? Why aren't there more Japans or more Koreas? Why aren't there more? Considering the fact that, the populations that we're talking about, I'm assuming that there's no difference between the work ethic of a Japanese person who works hard and the work ethic of a Korean person who works very hard, right?
We don't know that for sure. But,
well, hold on a second. We're here. We have to make some sort of safe assumption. I'm just saying there's hard workers in Vietnam, the same as there are hard workers in China.
There's probably not a big difference.
Probably not negligible at best.
Yeah.
So, why isn't the case that in this period of globalization, when one country cracks the case or cracks the secret, eventually that must become public in one way, shape, or form, right? Because people are able to look at indicators and say, this is what's going on, this is not what's going on, so let's do what's working best. Why aren't other East Asian countries following suit? Why didn't they follow suit?
Leadership, it could just be luck. You luck out with a great leader, good policy, a good environment. natural disasters happen that could alter. I mean, there are a lot of variables that go into how
political
countries run.
instability, American interventionism in some of these countries, right?
That's true. Yeah.
You know, and wars that rage with the international wars, and then also domestic wars from within. But I think the biggest cause is probably going to have to be education. You know, education is an investment, and if none of that is disinvolved, you know, then and there isn't a discipline there, then it's going to be hard to push forward.
So let me ask you guys another question then. Do we then have, in terms of success stories, do we have a moral obligation there? It's become the show of moral obligations, this has, but let's just keep going with this for a second. I mean, if one country gets it right, okay, in terms of entering globalization and entering it well, do we then say maybe we should have a fast track for other countries who, leadership willing, you know, God willing, in the sense of no, you know, terrible,
Sure.
you know, tsunamis or something like that? Do we then have to help them out to get in? Assuming that with an enhanced globalization we get better goods, but you know, maybe there's that incentive.
If two democratic governments are dealing with each other, dealing with a trade agreement, I mean, they're structured
Do they have to be democratic?
I think to be able to approach it from a moral standpoint, yeah, because I mean, if you're dealing with a dictatorship, then dictator doesn't necessarily have that country's best interest in mind.
But, hold on. I mean, Hobbes would say otherwise, but there's it's not necessarily the dictator that's at the head of it all. It's the people beneath him, right? So if the people beneath him, even if there was a dictator, or let's just say a monarchy of some sort, okay, that allowed its people to enter globalization, would you not see a moral obligation then, just because the form of government was different than the United States? Or
the more democratic a country is, the more likely the government is to be more on the side of the people. I mean, you can say not necessarily, but I think it's more likely that we're dealing with people that we want to deal with.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And you can approach it from a moral
standpoint. So let's say we're dealing with two democratic countries. Let's keep the example simple here, all right? So we're dealing with two democratic countries. One is much more advanced than the other in terms of any sort of indicator you want, you know, GDP per capita. We're talking about electricity access, and even internet access at this point now is a genuine indicator to look at, right?
Yeah.
Is there a moral obligation from one state, from the higher state to the lower state, to help out, to get them on board, and to get the ball rolling on their side?
Moral obligation.
Yeah, is there a moral obligation? The same way is there a moral obligation if somebody who's homeless asks for...
So you're pushing that as you'd sacrifice, the more well-off country would sacrifice some growth in order to help out. That's the first risk, right? Because we always talking about having good comparative advantages, right? Yeah. And that's the one thing you'd never want to lose. Period. Yeah. And it's different because when you're helping somebody out from person to person who's in need, you're not losing a comparative advantage, because there is no comparative advantage from person to person, right? If anything, if you really want to put a diagnostic on it, you're making yourself look better in the eyes of other people. But that's just egoism, right.
out of the roof. So let's ignore that for now. If we're just talking about countries, though, you do have much bigger stakes at play, right? And so maybe is that a good infringement on our moral obligation? Does the United States say, we do have some sort of obligation to help out this country, but because we would sacrifice so much for our own economic advantages, that it's not a good idea to do so?
Well, I think that's what happens a lot of time in the real world, and more that moral obligation gets put out maybe a little more socially at like the individual level, like the state lets the individual players, especially when we're talking about the United States, fulfill those moral obligations. And I think you see it case in point a lot when different religious or Christian groups are, going to Mexico, or they're going to Costa Rica or Central America, and they're going to build a school in a certain place, right, to help the poverty-stricken youth there. And so the state doesn't really have a policy on it, but it lets some of the players and actors within its own nation fulfill those.
So you're more of a constructivist on this, is the idea?
If that's what you want to call it.
If that's what you want to call it. No. You're somebody who's very much convinced on the power of ideas more than the powers of states.
Well, I mean, the state is...
Yes or no? I need an answer right now.
Yes. I mean, the state in and of itself is an idea, right? And it's a very modern
Well, I mean,
idea.
the state in itself is an idea, but it's also an idea essentially that has power behind it.
The state can support ideas, right? I mean, so that's kind of the whole point.
Well, I mean, in a democratic country, that's a little bit more difficult, right? Because you have people that might oppose those ideas, and then if you do have a state that embodies a certain idea over another,
you can kind of trick them. I mean,
you can trick them.
I mean, like,
so essentially,
you can frame it in a
how
way
democratic,
that you can be
right?
pushing.
Yeah, now you're caught.
But that happens all the time. I mean, come on, never mind.
Never mind.
No. It's very valid. It's true. You know, like there are ways. I mean,
it's like
sometimes you do know. Sometimes the people in power, if they are dealing altruistically, they do know what's best for them, even if other people don't. I mean, so.
But even if you know what's best, doesn't mean the rest are gonna follow you. Like
that's true.
So that's why there becomes an issue there.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's also an issue. There's also the issue of how to deal with people in that sense. I mean, how to deal ethically with people in that sense, right?
Yeah.
It's the Kantian question of what happens when a murderer asks you where his victim has gone off to, and you lie to him to save the victim. Technically, you've also lied to the murderer, even though he is a murderer. You're still lied to an individual. Which is weird because it puts you at moral odds, right? Either you did something very well, or you still lied to somebody.
Right, it's very morally ambiguous.
So I mean, the question of what happens in a democratic society it's probably best to return to the original question of autonomy, right? I mean, especially in a country like the United States where liberalism is the way to go in terms of human rights, in terms of it respecting the individual, in terms of individual rights itself, growing an idea of autonomy, even on a worldwide basis, shouldn't find that much friction, right?
Right.
I mean, you can get a lot of people from different sides. I mean, if we're talking about just the government in itself, Democrats and Republicans, we're talking about one side of the Democrats who are probably much more aware. Talking about one side of the Democrats,
that sounds about right.
Who are probably just not more aware. More aware sounds weird. I mean, they're on it for the sake of the other people, right? Whereas the Republicans who might need more explanation for any sort of use of the budget, right, which seems to be the way that things are going, the justification there becomes individual rights. Justification becomes autonomy of an individual life, which is something that their party platform goes. But that's again party politics. And that's all that. But still, we haven't really come up to answer this question. I mean, I'd like to get an answer out from everybody here. So what do you think? Do we have a moral obligation? Do states have a moral obligation to help out other states who are in need and who have people who are in poverty?
I believe they do. Whether that really happens or not, the complexities of
whether they
of
have
society,
it and whether they carry it out is obviously a completely different
thing. And what we see is, I think, a lot more of the developed countries, like they just tend to, I don't know, from my perspective, they tend to focus more on the self of their state being, and not get involved so much unless there is a personal stake, I think, for them in the long term or even the short term, where they can see it being an end goal. Case in point, the Arab Spring was going on, back in 2009, 10,
technically
right?
still now, so
right?
if you think about it,
And how quick have we been to move? Like, we haven't really done anything as a nation state. In my opinion, right? It's not enough. There'll be other people that say that.
Well, yeah, I mean, we decided to leave it up to them, essentially.
Yeah.
Well, most of the cases. What about you, Marco? Do we have a moral obligation to other states?
Well, I mean, it depends, like, on a case-by-case basis, for sure. I mean, I think we have a moral obligation to, try and alleviate poverty if there are some easy fixes that we could obviously help out on. I mean, like I said, but again, it just depends on a case-by-case basis. I mean, if we're looking at globalization, economic globalization, it's tough to say we have an economic moral obligation to build up other economies. I mean, that just seems like, I don't know, that's going a little too far. But, I mean, that can be done just based on self-interest, right? So, if we're looking at a classic globalization case where, we export, or, just kind of move our, industry over to more developing countries and build those countries up, and we're changing more into a service economy. That's basically what's been happening for the last 30 years, obviously. In the long term, that might help out everybody. So, gotta look at it from a self-interested perspective.
Okay. I'll take a sort of halfway line here between you two. I think that if we're going to have a moral obligation, it should be free of self-interest, right? We shouldn't be developing somebody's country for the sake of our own economic interest and then say, listen, we followed a moral obligation. That doesn't sound right to me, okay? I think a moral obligation has to be somewhere where it is absolutely out of the realm of self-interest, okay? Where we say, listen, we know that this is a problem, assuming poverty is still the bigger one. We can use something like autonomy to rally the troops if you're in a democratic country, and you can use different angles to try to alleviate the problem, whatever it may be. But I think before you get to doing that, I think there is still something to be said about relieving poverty within one's own country. I think we're okay in thinking that our own come first, if that makes any sense. I mean, look at it this way: if there were two kids drowning in a lake, but one of them was your own kid and the other one wasn't, and you could only save one, which one would you save?
Right, of course.
It would be. I mean, it would stand almost to reason, that it would be your kid. I mean, you could say human nature. You could say simply because one is your offspring, and that's that's more than human nature. It's just nature, right? But I don't think anybody would comment morally on you being a bad person for leaving the other kid to drown. Unfortunate as that may be. That being said, I think the same applies to poverty. I think the same applies to this sort of question as to who do we have a bigger moral obligation to. I think so long as there's still poverty in the country that you live in, you're still going to have to take care of those people first, then worry about the rest of the world as whether or not you have a moral obligation to them. I have a gut feeling that should poverty be alleviated within a country, that country still would have moral obligations outside of itself, I think. But we've never really come across that before, right? There's never been a country with no poverty, okay?
Right.
At least
Scandinavia. I mean, I don't know the stats, but I mean, they seem to be doing things very well. I mean, it's a different environment.
With nobody in their rate of poverty. I mean, that's also another thing, right? Who do you listen to in terms of, what poverty is to somebody? Do you assume that it's the country's own standard that says that's what poverty is, or do you go by $1 a day, $2 a day?
I mean, just
right.
And able to meet basic needs. You're basically every day is a struggle to survive.
Right, but I mean, being poor in the United States might be being rich in another country, simply for what it is, right? So the dollar value there of being poor is up in the air in terms. I'm just saying, like, what you got to watch out for that.
Right.
That's all. But again, I think the moral obligation needs to be free of self-interest, definitely. But whatever moral obligation does come about from one state to another has to come after the poor within this rich state have been taken care of, I think.
Okay, I mean, the moral imperative of being free of, what was the term? Self-interest. I mean, a positive side effect will most definitely be self-interest, though. Like, it'll definitely help. I mean, if we alleviate poverty in a country, there's no way that would not be a self-interested action in the long run, right? I mean, that's like, I mean, if the world's happier, like,
what if that country becomes a competitive power then? What happens if it's the Frankenstein model where, I've created a monster that's competing against me, for some way, shape, or form?
It's still only going to be good long term. I mean, it's more ideas, more innovation.
For people, but not necessarily for the country. So it doesn't necessarily come out of self-interest always. I mean, you could see situations where that doesn't happen. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, I mean, I beg to differ. I think if the economy is growing in other places, that's only going to help out everybody.
That's spoken like an economist.
That's spoken like an economist. Yeah. No, but I'm looking at it from the state's point of view, where if you do create a power that becomes competitive, then you almost shot yourself in the foot. Competitive meaning that they're eking you out of whatever.
Competition is good. I mean, then that only drives us to be more innovative.
That is the message that we like to purport, I think, here in America. But at the same time, like, you see, like, look at the cars that we have here in America, right? And there are companies that are kept out of the market. BMW doesn't provide, like, they provide personal individual cars, but they don't provide, like, the high, heavy grade mechanical stuff for construction
That's
work.
true, yeah.
Tata Motors isn't let in here, and so you got to ask yourself these questions.
The wave of Chinese car companies that exist. I mean, those obviously have problems because of intellectual property, infringements that would obviously come about. But yeah, I mean, definitely there's definitely doors that are closed on purpose, right?
Yeah.
So, but that's all I'm trying to say. Coming back to the whole poverty thing, I think you gotta be able to follow moral obligation based on no self-interest. The only self-interest being to be an ethical actor.
Yeah.
But to the other side, be able to take care of your own first, because those are the ones that to the nation matter more, simply because they're within your own nation. I think that's more a comment saying you're morally okay by looking after your own first than you are looking
we can
after
do both.
somebody else.
We're pretty wealthy country. We have a lot of money to do everything. People always, how do we allocate the budget? We cut defense. We don't really have to cut anything. We can just raise taxes a little bit and pay for a lot of things. Really, it comes down. It's not really that. People just don't want to pay like a few more percentage in taxes. That's like the major problem.
Somewhere in the United States, Glenn Beck is just like
it's
having
a little
headache right now.
Disgusting, really.
Choking on his own tongue.
Yeah.
But
right, but that's that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's as good a place to cut it as any. Fellas, thank you very much for joining us on this
seventh
podcast here. This economic escapade that we've had. Economics, ethics, poverty.
Yeah.
What else have we had? We've had some laughs along the way. Glenn Beck. All of these tags perfect for our podcast. So thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you again next Monday. Yeah, so to close out the show,
Russo,
Marco,
and Alessandro, as always, thank you very much for listening, and we hope you have a pleasant day.